The first report came from an alien patrol near the dead edge of the Karen Belt. At first, no one cared. The patrol leader, Commander Selvek of the Narrow Dominion, sent a short message to the sector station. It described a human fleet moving in silence through the dust fields beyond the outer moons of Trin 4. The ships were slow. Their hulls looked scarred and uneven. Some had dark metal plates that did not even match in color. Others carried long lines of exposed framework, like broken bones under old skin. To Selvek, they looked ancient. To the station officers, they looked embarrassing. Humanity had been part of galactic trade for almost 80 years, but few powers respected them. Their worlds were distant, their politics confusing, and their ships always seemed too old, too heavy, too ugly. The great powers of the galaxy built smooth warcraft covered in energy veils and living armor. Humans built metal walls, thick engines, and strange machines no one fully understood. So when the sensor images of the fleet spread through the station, laughter followed. They brought relics. Did they pull them from a museum? Maybe humans planned to bore us to death. Even Selvek allowed himself a smile. Then his sensors found something impossible. None of the ships had active weapon signatures. None of them ran standard shield patterns. None of them used modern battle networks. And yet every scan aimed at the fleet returned incomplete, as if the ships were hiding something inside themselves. Selvek ordered a closer pass. That was when one of the oldest human vessels turned, slowly, almost like a waking animal, and aimed its enormous bow toward his patrol line. No weapon charged. No shield rose. No warning came. But every system aboard Selvek's flagship died for exactly 3 seconds. 3 seconds in empty space felt like death. When power returned, one message sat on every screen in the patrol group, written in clear trade language. Do not approach the sleeping fleet. Selvek stared at the words, his throat suddenly dry, because the ship that sent the warning had no active transmitter. And behind the drifting human fleet, deep in the dust and darkness, something much larger had just opened its eyes. Commander Selvek did not speak for several seconds. Inside the bridge of his patrol ship, the officers stared at their screens. The warning message still glowed in white letters. Do not approach the sleeping fleet. It did not look like a normal transmission. It had appeared directly inside every system on the ship. No signal wave. No traceable source. That alone was disturbing. Selvek slowly leaned forward in his command chair. Run a signal search, he ordered quietly. The communications officer moved quickly. His fingers danced across the control panel, scanning all frequencies, short-range, deep-band, encrypted channels. A moment passed, then another. Finally, the officer shook his head. Nothing, Commander. There is no transmission source. Selvek felt a strange chill move through him. Messages did not appear from nowhere, but something about those human ships did not follow the rules. He turned his attention back to the large viewing screen at the center of the bridge. Outside the glass, the Karen Belt stretched like a frozen storm of dust and broken rock. Small asteroids floated slowly through the dark, reflecting distant starlight. And there, drifting between the dust clouds, was a human fleet. At first glance, the ships truly looked like relics. Their hulls were thick and rough. Long metal ridges ran along their sides like old scars. Many of the vessels carried massive engine blocks that looked decades out of date. But Selvek noticed something else now. They were positioned with perfect balance. Each ship floated at a precise distance from the others. The pattern looked random at first, but when his sensors mapped the fleet, the pattern revealed itself. It was a grid, a very large grid. Commander, the sensor officer said suddenly. Selvek turned. Yes, I am detecting energy readings. From weapons? No, sir. Then from engines? The officer hesitated. No. Commander, from inside the ships. Selvek narrowed his eyes. Explain. The officer enlarged the sensor image on the screen. Inside each human vessel were faint energy lines running through the hull. They moved slowly, like deep currents inside a frozen ocean. These readings are extremely old, the officer explained. The power signatures match technology that is centuries outdated. The bridge grew quiet. Centuries? Selvek studied the readings carefully. Humanity had only joined the galactic community less than a century ago. Their modern ships use hybrid technology copied from several alien empires. But these readings were different, much older, much deeper. Selvek suddenly remembered the strange phrase in the warning message, the sleeping fleet. He leaned forward. Run a historical database search, he ordered. Look for any human fleet project older than their first contact with the Dominion. The data officer nodded and began searching through the massive galactic archives. While the search ran, Selvek continued observing the drifting ships. They were not preparing for battle. They were not moving. They were simply waiting. The fleet contained at least 50 large vessels and nearly 100 smaller support ships, all silent, all cold, all ancient, and yet somehow alive. Then another alert appeared on the sensor panel. "Commander!" the officer called. Selvek turned sharply. "What is it?" Long-range scan just detected a large object behind the fleet. Selvek's stomach tightened. "Display it." The screen shifted. At first, nothing appeared but darkness. Then the sensors slowly adjusted the contrast, and something enormous emerged from the shadows. It was not a ship. It was far too large. The object stretched almost 6 kilometers long. Its shape looked strange, almost like a massive armored spine drifting through space. Huge metal plates overlapped across its body like ancient scales, and across its entire surface ran the same faint energy currents that filled the smaller human ships. The officers on the bridge stared in disbelief. Selvek felt his throat tighten. "Is that a station?" The sensor officer shook his head. "No, Commander." He zoomed the image further. Large engine structures appeared at the back of the giant structure. Then weapon mounts. Hundreds of them. Selvek's eyes widened slowly. "It's a warship." The bridge fell completely silent. A 6-kilometer warship. Even the most powerful empires rarely built ships larger than 2 kilometers. Massive vessels like this required enormous energy resources and complex engineering. And this one looked ancient, older than the rest of the fleet. "Energy levels are increasing inside the structure," the sensor officer reported nervously. "How fast?" Selvek asked, very slowly but steadily. Selvek leaned back in his chair. Something was happening, something important. He knew the Dominion command would want answers. "Open a channel to Sector Station," Selvek ordered. "Yes, Commander." Within seconds of face of station, Overseer Haltron appeared on the bridge screen. The tall, gray-skinned official looked mildly annoyed. "What is it?" "Commander Selvek, your earlier message about a human junk fleet was hardly worth interrupting station operations." Selvek kept his voice calm. "Overseer, I recommend you review the sensor data I just transmitted." Haltron glanced down at another display. At first his expression showed boredom, then confusion, then shock. "That structure behind the fleet, is that real?" "Yes." Haltron leaned closer to his screen. "How large is it?" 6 kilometers, possibly more. The overseer looked stunned. "That is impossible. No one builds ships like that." Selvek spoke quietly. "Humans might." Haltron did not laugh this time. Why would they hide such a vessel in the Karen Belt? Selvek looked back toward the silent fleet outside his ship. "I believe this fleet has been here for a long time." "How long?" Selvek hesitated. "Possibly before humanity joined the galactic community." Haltron stared. "That would mean this fleet is older than our diplomatic contact with them." "Yes." The overseer frowned deeply. "Then why activate it now?" Selvek did not answer immediately, because another alert suddenly appeared. "Commander!" the sensor officer whispered. Selvek turned. "What now?" The officer pointed at the screen. Multiple human vessels are beginning to power up. Across the dark field outside, faint lights began appearing along the hulls of the rusted ships. One by one, slowly, like stars waking in the night. Energy currents inside the fleet grew brighter, and the giant warship behind them pulsed with deeper power. Selvek felt something inside his chest tighten. "Overseer," he said quietly to Haltron, "I believe we are about to learn why this fleet exists." Haltron looked uneasy now. "Commander, maintain observation distance." Selvek nodded. But as he watched the awakening ships, he felt a strange feeling growing inside him. Not fear, not exactly. It felt more like standing near the edge of a great secret. Something the galaxy had forgotten, something humanity had kept hidden for a very long time. Then the massive warship behind the fleet moved, just slightly, but enough to prove one terrifying truth. It had not been drifting. It had been waiting, and far across the sector, unknown to Selvek and the Dominion, another group of ships had just entered the system. They were not human. They belonged to the powerful Valorian expansion fleet, and their commanders had already decided the old human ships would make easy targets. They had no idea what they were about to wake. Far from Commander Selvek's patrol ships, deep in the outer region of the Karen Belt, a new fleet entered the system. Their arrival was loud. Bright warp tunnels opened across the darkness, tearing through space like glowing scars. One after another, massive warships emerged from the blue distortions. The Valorian expansion fleet had arrived. Unlike the silent human vessels, the Valorian ships looked powerful and modern. Their hulls were smooth and silver. Long lines of energy shields glowed around them like protective shells. Massive plasma cannons rotated slowly along their sides. There were more than 60 warships, cruisers, carriers, heavy battle destroyers. It was a full military fleet. Inside the command vessel VSS Dominion Spear, Fleet Admiral Corthan stood at the center of the bridge. Corthan was tall even for his species. His armor-like skin reflected the cold blue lights of the control room. He watched the system map carefully as the new sensor data appeared. One of his officers spoke. "Admiral, we are receiving unusual readings from the asteroid belt ahead." Corthan crossed his arms. "What kind of readings?" "Multiple vessels, sir. Approximately 150 objects. Military ships?" The officer studied the scan. After a moment, he laughed softly. "No, Admiral. They appear primitive." The bridge crew chuckled. Corthan tilted his head slightly. "Primitive?" "Yes, sir. The hull structures match human engineering patterns." The laughter grew louder. Human ships had a strange reputation across the galaxy. They were known for being bulky, outdated, and inefficient compared to the sleek vessels built by the major empires. Many commanders considered them ugly machines. Corthan looked at the screen. "Show me." The main display changed. The image of the rusted human fleet appeared. Old metal surfaces, heavy engine blocks, thick armor plates. It looked like a graveyard of forgotten machines. Corthan smiled slightly. "A human salvage fleet?" The officer shrugged. "Possibly. Their engines appear inactive. Any weapon signatures?" "None detected." "Shields?" "Negative." The admiral leaned back. "Then they are harmless." Another officer spoke carefully. "Sir, there is also a larger structure behind them." The screen zoomed out. The enormous 6-kilometer human warship appeared in the darkness. For a moment, the bridge went quiet. Even Corthan looked surprised. "That is unusual." The sensor officer studied the readings again. "Energy output is extremely low. Admiral, the vessel appears dormant." "Dormant?" "Yes, sir. It may be an abandoned construction platform or an ancient station." Corthan thought for a moment. Then he smiled again. "Interesting." The Valorian Empire believed strongly in expansion. Every new system was an opportunity for resources, territory, or military advantage. And a massive abandoned structure in deep space could hold valuable technology. "Prepare an approach course," Corthan ordered calmly. One of the officers hesitated. "Admiral, there is something else." "What?" "We are detecting another fleet nearby." Corthan frowned. "Identify." "Small patrol group belonging to the Narrow Dominion." Corthan waved his hand dismissively. "They are irrelevant." But at that exact moment, a new message appeared on the Valorian communication screens. The same message Selvek had received earlier. "Do not approach the sleeping fleet." The Valorian bridge grew quiet. The communications officer quickly checked the signal. "Admiral, there was no transmission." Corthan's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "The message appeared directly in our systems. There was no external signal." Corthan looked at the human fleet again. For the first time, he felt a small spark of curiosity. scanned the human ships again. The sensors ran another deep scan. The results appeared. Energy currents inside the ships were slowly increasing. Still weak, still ancient, but rising. Interesting, Corthan murmured. One of the younger officers spoke nervously. Admiral, perhaps we should respect a warning. Several crew members nodded quietly, but Corthan only smiled. A warning from rusted relics? The bridge crew laughed again. Corthan stepped closer to the main display. Those ships are barely functioning. They cannot even power proper shields. He pointed at the giant vessel behind them. And that structure looks abandoned. Then he turned toward his weapons officer. Bring our fleet to attack readiness. Yes, Admiral. Across the Valorian fleet, weapon systems began charging. Plasma cannons warmed with bright blue light. Shield generators expanded into powerful defensive fields. Their fleet formation tightened. Dozens of warships slowly moved toward the human vessels. Far away, Commander Selvek watched the same movement on his sensors. His heart sank. They are going to attack, he whispered. The officers on his bridge looked worried. Commander, should we warn them? Selvek shook his head slowly. They already received the warning. Then we must leave the area. Selvek hesitated. Part of him wanted to retreat immediately, but another part wanted to see what would happen, because the human fleet was no longer completely silent. More lights were appearing across the rusted ships, and the giant vessel behind them was beginning to glow with deep red energy lines. Something ancient was waking. Back on the Valorian command ship, Admiral Corthan watched calmly. Target the nearest human vessel, he ordered. Yes, Admiral. A cruiser moved forward in the attack line. Its main plasma cannon rotated toward one of the old human warships. Charging weapon, the officer announced. Bright energy gathered at the cannon's mouth. Corthan raised one hand. Fire. A beam of blue plasma exploded across space. It raced toward the human ship like a burning spear. Selvek watched in horror. The blast struck the rusted vessel directly. For a moment, the explosion filled space with light. Dust and debris scattered through the asteroid field. The Valorian bridge crew cheered. But then the smoke cleared, and the ancient human ship was still there, completely intact. No shield, no damage, just silent metal. Corthan frowned. That is impossible. Before he could speak again, something new happened. Across the entire human fleet, the internal energy currents suddenly flared brighter. Lights appeared along the hulls. Old systems awakened. Engines that had been silent for decades began humming, and the massive 6-kilometer warship behind them opened hundreds of small armored panels along its surface. Inside those panels, ancient weapon systems slowly rotated outward. Selvek felt cold fear crawl up his spine, because the energy readings from the giant vessel were no longer weak. They were rising fast, very fast. On the Valorian command ship, the sensor officer shouted, Admiral, that structure is activating. Corthan stared at the screen. Impossible. The human fleet formation shifted slightly. The ships moved with perfect coordination, like soldiers waking from sleep. Then a new message appeared across every ship in the system. Human, Valorian, Dominion. Everyone received the same words. The fleet has awakened, Selvek whispered softly. Oh no, because the message was followed by a second line. A line that made every commander in the system suddenly understand the terrible truth. This is a human protectorate zone, and the Valorian fleet had just fired the first shot. For a moment, the entire star system fell frozen. 3 different fleets floated in the darkness of the Karen Belt. The Valorian expansion fleet stood ready for battle, their weapons glowing with charged energy. Commander Selvek's small, narrow Dominion patrol group watched nervously from a safe distance. And in the middle of the asteroid field, the ancient human fleet continued waking from its long sleep. Across the rusted hulls, lights slowly spread like fire across dry metal. Engines that had not moved for decades began to hum again. Old weapon ports rotated outward. Massive antenna towers unfolded like metal wings. The ships did not rush. They moved slowly, deliberately, like something very old stretching after a long rest. Inside Selvek's command ship, The bridge crew watched the sensor screens with growing fear. "Commander, energy levels are increasing across every human vessel," the sensor officer reported. Selvek nodded quietly. "How high?" "Higher than expected for technology of this age." Selvek looked back at the main screen. The ancient warships did not look impressive. Their metal hulls were rough. Their designs were outdated, but something about them felt heavy, solid, like ancient mountains drifting in space. And the largest vessel, the 6-kilometer warship, was now glowing with deep red energy lines across its entire body. Selvek spoke softly. That ship was not abandoned. The communications officer suddenly turned. "Commander, a new signal is coming from a human fleet." "Display it." The message appeared on the screen, but this time it was different. Instead of simple text, a calm human voice spoke through every speaker on the bridge. "This system is under human protection." The voice sounded old, not tired, but ancient, like someone who had waited a very long time to speak again. This fleet was placed here to guard this region of space. Selvek felt confused. "Guard what?" The voice continued. "All foreign military vessels are ordered to withdraw immediately." The message ended. Silence filled the bridge again. Selvek slowly turned his eyes back toward the Valorian fleet. But Admiral Corthan was not the kind of commander who obeyed warnings. Inside the Dominion spear, Corthan stared at the human ships with growing anger. The earlier plasma strike had done nothing, and now the humans were trying to threaten him. A warning from relics, from scrap ships. Corthan clenched his fist behind his back. "Charge all primary weapons," he ordered coldly. One of his officers spoke nervously. "Admiral, their fleet is activating. Perhaps we should reconsider." Corthan turned sharply. "Those ships are ancient." "Yes, Admiral, but their energy readings are unstable." The officer fell silent. Corthan pointed at the human fleet on the screen. "They rely on outdated armor and brute force designs. Modern Valorian technology will tear them apart." Another officer looked uncertain. "But that large vessel—" Corthan interrupted him. "A relic." The admiral stepped forward. "Fire a full volley." Across the Valorian fleet, weapon systems flared bright. Dozens of plasma cannons ignited. Missile tubes opened. Heavy ion lances charged. Then the fleet fired. The darkness of space exploded with light. Streams of plasma streaked toward the human fleet. Missiles cut through the asteroid field like burning comets. Ion beams carved glowing paths across the void. Selvek watched the attack in horror. "Impact in 5 seconds," the sensor officer whispered. Everyone held their breath. Then the barrage struck. Explosions erupted across the human formation. Dust and metal fragments scattered through the asteroid field. Even the massive warship at the rear was struck by several plasma blasts. For a moment, the battlefield filled with burning debris. On the Valorian command ship, Admiral Corthan smiled. Target confirmed. But then the sensor officer spoke again, his voice shaking. "Admiral, damage reports are not matching." Corthan frowned. "Explain." The officer stared at his screen. "The human ships, they are still operational." "What?" The smoke cleared slowly. One by one, the shapes of the human vessels appeared again. They were still there, not destroyed, not broken. The ancient ships had not even raised shields. They had simply absorbed the attacks. Their thick metal hulls were scorched in places, but intact. Corthan's eyes widened slightly. "That is impossible." Then something new appeared on the sensors. "Admiral," the officer shouted. "Energy surge detected." "From where?" The officer pointed at the giant vessel behind the fleet. That ship, the 6-kilometer warship, was glowing brighter now. Deep red energy lines ran across its armor like burning rivers. Massive engine vents opened along its sides, and hundreds of heavy weapon structures rotated into position. But the weapons did not look like modern plasma cannons. They were different. Huge cylindrical barrels, thick metal rails, ancient designs. Selvek's sensor officer whispered in disbelief. "Those are kinetic rail cannons." Selvek's eyes widened. Rail cannons were old technology. Very old. Most empires had abandoned them centuries ago. But humans had always loved simple, powerful machines. The giant warship slowly turned its massive body toward the Valorian fleet. Not quickly, just enough to aim. Inside the Valorian command ship, alarm signals exploded across the bridge. "Admiral, target locks detected," Corthan shouted. "Raise maximum shields." Across the Valorian fleet, shield generators flared to full power. Energy barriers expanded around every ship, but the human vessel did not fire immediately. Instead, the calm human voice returned to every communication channel. "You were warned." Then the weapons fired. There was no bright plasma beam, no glowing laser, only a deep metallic thunder that vibrated through space. The massive rail cannons launched their projectiles. Solid metal slugs the size of small spacecraft accelerated to impossible speeds. They crossed the distance in seconds. The first projectile struck a Valorian destroyer. Its shields held for a fraction of a second. Then the slug punched through them like paper. The entire ship exploded into fragments. A second projectile ripped through a cruiser. The kinetic force tore the vessel in half. A third slug slammed into a carrier's shield wall. The barrier shattered instantly. The impact sent the entire ship spinning out of formation. Inside Selvek's bridge, no one spoke. They watched in stunned silence. The ancient human fleet had not used advanced energy weapons. They had not used modern technology. They had used something older, something simpler, and terrifyingly powerful. On the Valorian flagship, Admiral Corthan finally realized the truth. These ships were not weak relics. They were fortresses, built in an age when human engineers solved problems with overwhelming physical force. And now those ancient weapons were fully awake. Another rail cannon volley charged across the human warship, and the Valorian fleet suddenly understood that the rusted ships they had mocked were built for wars far greater than this one. The Karen Belt had become a battlefield. Broken asteroids drifted slowly through space. Burning pieces of Valorian ships floated in silent clouds. Small fires glowed across twisted metal wreckage. The first volley from the ancient human warship had already destroyed 3 Valorian vessels, and the giant rail cannons were charging again. Inside the Dominion spear, Admiral Corthan finally understood something was terribly wrong. These were not relic ships. These were war machines from another age. "Status report," he shouted. The sensor officer spoke quickly. 3 ships destroyed, Admiral. 2 cruisers heavily damaged. Enemy weapon systems are recharging. How long until their next volley? 10 seconds. Corthan clenched his jaw. 10 seconds was not enough time. "Bring all ships into evasive formation," he ordered. Across the Valorian fleet, engines roared as ships scattered away from their original attack lines. The elegant formation broke apart as vessels tried to escape the firing path of the massive rail cannons. But the human fleet was already adjusting. The ancient ships moved slowly but with perfect coordination. Their sensors had tracked every Valorian movement. More weapon ports opened across the rusted hulls. Not just on the giant warship, on every ship. Commander Selvek watched the new readings appear on his screen. "Commander, the smaller human ships are activating weapons." Selvek leaned forward. "What kind?" The sensor officer blinked in surprise. "Missile systems." Missiles. Another ancient technology. But these were not simple rockets. Hundreds of launch tubes open along the human ships. Within seconds, swarms of missiles shot into space. They did not travel in straight lines. They moved like intelligent predators. Each missile adjusted its path through the asteroid field, avoiding debris and obstacles. Selvek's eyes widened. "These are not normal missiles." The sensor officer nodded. "They are guided by advanced navigation AI." The missile swarm rushed toward the Valorian fleet. Inside the Valorian ships, defensive weapons activated instantly. Point defense lasers opened fire. Anti-missile cannons filled space with exploding fragments. Many missiles were destroyed, but many survived. The swarm broke apart and attacked from multiple angles. Several Valorian destroyers were struck directly. Explosions ripped through their shields. One cruiser lost its engine section completely. The battlefield turned chaotic. Valorian ships fired back with plasma cannons and ion beams. Human vessels answered with heavy missiles and more rail cannon strikes. But the humans were not rushing. They were controlling the battle slowly, patiently, as if they had practiced the strategy long ago. Inside Selvek's patrol ship, the crew watched the battle unfold like a nightmare. "Commander," the censor officer said quietly, "the human fleet is not trying to destroy the Valorians completely." Selvek looked confused. "What do you mean?" "They are targeting engines, weapons, shield generators." Selvek studied the damage reports. The officer was right. The humans were disabling ships, not destroying them. That was strange. Very strange. Selvek thought about the earlier message again. This is a human protectorate zone. Maybe the humans were not defending themselves. Maybe they were protecting something. Back on the Valorian flagship, Admiral Corthan realized he had lost control of the battle. His fleet was stronger on paper, more advanced technology, better shields. But the ancient human fleet had something else. Preparation. These ships had been built specifically for this region of space. Their thick armor resisted plasma attacks. Their weapons ignored energy shields. And their strategy focused on disabling enemy systems one by one. Corthan felt anger burning inside his chest. "We cannot lose to museum ships," he growled. The weapons officer spoke nervously. "Admiral, our fleet is losing maneuverability." "How many ships still operational?" 42 fully operational, 12 heavily damaged, 6 destroyed. Corthan stared at the battlefield map. If this continued, his fleet would be crippled. He needed to change the situation. Suddenly he had an idea. "Target the large human vessel," he ordered. "The 6-kilometer warship." The officer hesitated. "Admiral, its armor appears extremely strong." Corthan nodded. "Yes, but it is also their command center." He pointed at the screen. "Destroy that ship and the rest of the fleet may lose coordination." The officer slowly understood. "Yes, Admiral." Across the Valorian fleet, several heavy cruisers changed direction. They began moving toward the giant human warship, their largest weapons charged. Inside Selvek's patrol ship, the sensor alarms rang again. "Commander!" the officer shouted. "The Valorians are concentrating fire on the human flagship." Selvek watched the movement carefully. The Valorian cruisers formed a tight attack group, all weapons aimed at the massive vessel. Energy levels climbed rapidly. "They are preparing a full strike," the officer whispered. Selvek held his breath. This time the attack would be much stronger. The Valorian fleet fired. For heavy plasma beams and dozens of ion lances streaked across space toward the giant human warship. The blast struck the massive hull directly. Explosions lit the darkness. Even the asteroid field shook with the impact. For several seconds, the giant vessel disappeared inside a storm of burning energy. Selvek waited. Everyone waited. Then the fire slowly faded, and the giant warship was still there. The armor plates were glowing from heat, but the ship had barely moved. The Valorian attack had not even slowed it down. Across its hull, the deep red energy lines brightened again. The rail cannons turned slowly. But this time something else happened. A new signal spread through every ship in the system. The same calm human voice returned. "You have demonstrated hostile intent." The voice paused. "Final warning." The battlefield fell silent for a moment. Even the Valorian ships stopped firing. The voice spoke again. "Leave the system." Admiral Corthan stared at the message. His fleet was damaged. His advantage was gone. And the ancient warships were still waking. For the first time since entering the system, Corthan felt uncertainty. Because a giant human vessel was now opening something new along its massive spine. Something far larger than the rail cannons. A weapon system that had not been used yet. And its energy readings were rising faster than anything seen before. The battlefield had gone quiet again. Hundreds of damaged ships drifted slowly through the asteroid belt. Broken Valorian vessels floated in pieces across the dark field. Small fires burned inside shattered hulls. But the war was not finished. At the center of the system, the enormous human warship continued opening the massive structure along its spine. Commander Selvek watched the sensor screen carefully. "Energy levels are rising again, the sensor officer said. How strong? Selvek asked. The officer swallowed. Stronger than anything we have seen so far. Selvek felt a cold weight settle in his chest. Whatever that weapon was, it was not designed for small battles. Across the system, Admiral Corthan stood silently on the bridge of the Dominion Spear. His fleet was wounded. Many ships were damaged. Several had already retreated from the fight. And now the human flagship was preparing something new. The weapons officer spoke carefully. Admiral, the human vessel is charging another system. Corthan did not answer immediately. He stared at the battlefield map. The Valorian Empire had always believed its technology was superior. For decades, their fleets had dominated nearby systems. But these human ships were different. They were older, slower, less elegant, yet every weapon they used had been designed with brutal simplicity. Heavy armor, massive rail cannons, missile swarms, and now something even larger. The sensor officer suddenly spoke. Admiral, we are detecting extreme mass acceleration energy. Corthan turned quickly. What does that mean? The officer enlarged the scan. Inside the giant human vessel, a long chamber had opened across its spine. Huge electromagnetic rails ran the entire length of the ship. At the end of the rails sat something enormous, a projectile, much larger than the earlier rail cannon rounds. Selvek saw the same image on his own sensors. His eyes widened slowly. That is not a normal weapon. The sensor officer nodded. No, it is something else. The massive chamber inside the human warship continued charging. Power flowed through the rails like lightning. The human voice returned across all communication channels. Calm, unemotional. This is the final defense system of the Protector fleet. The message continued. This weapon was built for threats far greater than your fleet. Selvek felt chills run down his spine. Far greater? Then why build it here? The human voice answered the unspoken question. For centuries, this region of space has been under silent protection. Beyond this system lies a corridor used by several peaceful civilizations, a passage of trade, travel, and life. Selvek finally understood. The Karen Belt was not random. It was a gateway, a natural path through dangerous star clusters, a path many species use safely. And the ancient human fleet had been guarding it the entire time. The voice spoke again. You attacked the Protector fleet. You ignored warnings. You fired first. On the Valorian flagship, Admiral Corthan clenched his fists. He had made a mistake, a terrible mistake. The human voice continued. This system will now demonstrate why it is protected. The weapon finished charging. Across the entire giant warship, lights turned bright white. The massive rails glowed like burning metal. Then the weapon fired. There was no explosion, no bright beam, just a deep shockwave through space. The giant projectile launched from a human vessel at incredible speed. It did not aim at a ship. Instead, it raced toward the empty region behind the Valorian fleet. The projectile traveled for several seconds. Then it struck a large asteroid nearly 50 kilometers wide. The impact was silent, but the result was terrifying. The asteroid simply disappeared. Not shattered, not broken. Gone. The projectile had passed straight through it, and kept going. Moments later, the remains of the asteroid field drifted away in a massive expanding cloud of dust. Commander Selvek stared in complete disbelief. That weapon, the sensor officer whispered. It can destroy planetary objects. Selvek slowly nodded. The human fleet had just demonstrated power far beyond the current battle. The message was clear. If the humans had aimed that weapon at the Valorian fleet, there would be nothing left. On the Dominion Spear, Admiral Corthan understood the message immediately. The humans were not threatening him. They were teaching him. His fleet had been spared, but only because the humans chose not to destroy them. The human voice returned one final time. You have seen the defense of this corridor. You may leave. Silence followed. Corthan stood still for several seconds. Then he finally spoke. All Valorian ships disengage. The officers looked relieved. Retreat course? Yes. Within minutes, the Valorian fleet began pulling away from the battlefield. Damaged ships moved slowly toward their war positions. The surviving vessels formed a loose escort around them. No human ship fired. No missiles followed. The ancient fleet simply watched. When the last Valorian ship opened its warp tunnel and vanished, the battlefield became quiet again. Selvek's patrol group remained in the distance. None of them moved. Finally, Selvek spoke. "Human fleet, this is Commander Selvek of the Narrow Dominion." For a moment, there was no response. Then the calm voice answered again. "We recognize your presence." Selvek hesitated. "You have guarded this system for centuries?" "Yes." Selvek looked out at the rusted ships drifting in perfect formation. "But why hide it?" The human voice paused. Then it answered softly. "Because protection does not require recognition." Selvek felt a strange respect growing inside him. For years, the galaxy had mocked human engineering. They had laughed at the bulky ships, the outdated designs, the heavy metal hulls. But those same designs had guarded a vital corridor of space quietly for generations, without praise, without reward. The voice spoke once more. "The fleet will return to standby mode." Across the battlefield, the human ships slowly powered down. Weapon systems closed. Lights dimmed. Engines fell silent again. One by one, the ancient warships returned to sleep among the drifting asteroids. The giant 6-kilometer vessel closed a massive rail chamber along its spine. Within minutes, the entire fleet looked like nothing more than a graveyard of forgotten ships again. Silent, ancient, harmless. Commander Selvek watched the final energy readings fade. Then he whispered quietly to himself. The galaxy laughed at rusted ships. He looked out across the dark asteroid belt. But those ships were never meant to impress anyone. They were meant to protect. And now Selvek knew the truth. Some of the most powerful guardians in the galaxy looked like nothing at all. The end rocket,